Greetings everyone, I'm Record2nd and welcome to the technical showcase of Snapshot 4D for more mobs. I want to point out first and foremost that you should watch the main video if you haven't seen it yet, because otherwise you'll be confused. I'm not going to explain every feature, I'm just going to go into the technical details of them. So let's start with the fact that we've updated to 1.21, which means we have adopted a ton of stuff that's happened between 1.19 and this version. And that means we're now using item components for every custom item, and almost all custom items are actually now poisonous potatoes. We are also using now the rarity system, and some items are common, uncommon, or rare, or even epic. In the past, we've had our own rarity system for the item colors. We had gray and dark gray. Now we're just using the vanilla rarity system. And also, since we've changed the namespace from IMM to more mobs, none of the old stuff is going to work in this version, as I said in the main video. And also, a lot of the tags have changed as well. So, for example, the entity tags have changed from IMM _ the entity name. Now it's just more mobs dot and then the entity name. And that's just one example. Basically, every single name of anything, tags, entities, sound effects, basically anything you can imagine has been changed, and that's one of the reasons why nothing from an existing world will carry over to the new version of more mobs and continue working as intended. So when it comes to the two new mobs, they're not implemented fully, as I said, but actually there also is spawning implemented for them. So you can go into the game files and in some functions remove the hashtags, and you can enable these guys spawning naturally. It even works with mob tweaks. And one more thing about the technical changes in this version, the resource pack assets have been reorganized. So before, for some reason, everything was in the Minecraft folder and stuff for more mobs was in an IMM subfolder. Now there are two folders, one for Minecraft and one for more mobs, and everything from sound effects to textures to models to language files has been moved to the more mobs folder, unless it has to be in the Minecraft folder. Also, a lot of things now run at every second instead of every tick, which helps a lot with performance, and that's a whole separate part of the pack now, which changed a lot of the code. The spawning system works now at the 1 second intervals, and a bunch of other things as well. One more thing is that also the recipes have been moved to the new system, so now the prismarine stick and the diamond splinter recipes have been moved to the crafting table. Also, the crafting station recipe will no longer craft the structure void, which will be then replaced by a crafting station. It'll now just straight up craft the crafting station. Also, the more mobs music discs will now use the built-in vanilla component that actually enables jukebox functionality for any custom item, and that's why you can play them in the vanilla jukebox. The node particle that I mentioned in the main video is one of those examples of the things that run once every second instead of every tick like they used to be in the past. And the stacking thing is now also using one of the item components, which determines the max stack size. And the emissiveness is actually an Optifine feature. It doesn't revolve around anything from vanilla. At the moment it's using Optifine, and some features might not work properly depending on which mods you will use if you don't use Optifine. And the sound that the crafting station will use is actually a crafter sound, and the same particles from the crafter are now used in the crafting station. As you could see in the video, I used an example of the trident and the ash crafting recipes to demonstrate that in some cases the crafting station will continue putting the result of the crafting recipe into the output slot if it can continue stacking. In case of the bone meal recipe, since you get 2 bone meal from 1 piece of ash, it'll only stack if there's 62 or less items in the output slot. So if you have 63 bone meal, it'll stop crafting because it cannot stack to 65. Now the diamond splitter stuff. So this is very simple. It's just loot table changes in the loot tables from these structures. Although I want to point out that there might be an issue on the vanilla side of the game with some of the containers in trial chambers. So if you can still get diamond blocks or something that's not desirable, I double checked everything and I made sure that the loot tables are different, so that must be a bug in vanilla about the way that loot tables work in these structures. And to tell you more about the loot table stuff, all the more mobs items have their own loot table now, which is why the gift functions have been removed in favor of you just using the loot command. This also means that if an item is referenced in a different loot table, it'll also just reference that loot table. So when in past versions you had a flaming tarantula loot table, for example, that would drop one of the custom items, being for example the Chelicera, the item itself itself was fully described with all the custom components and other details in the Flaming Tarantula loot table. In this version, the item loot tables are just referenced in other loot tables. So this might have been confusing. The invisible witches sometimes happen because there was a texture in the game which used the random entities feature from Optifine, and somehow that made some witches invisible, so that texture was removed, and so all your witches should be visible. The silent tag is just an entity tag that you can add to more mobs creatures with commands to make sure that if they have custom sounds that they don't make sounds anymore, because their NBT data is already set to silent, so you cannot use that to turn their sounds off. And the tagging messages now use the name of the entity as they are in the translation key. And so since entities in more mobs have different colors, for Optifine to choose which models and textures apply to the mob, they actually have colors in the language files themselves, and those will be the colors you will now see in the tagging messages. So when Mimires duplicate your items, there's no way to obtain the item after the entity has died. There is a 0 drop chance on what they're holding. So as stated in the video, the Ender Jaculi have an inverted spawning criteria from Dragon Phantoms. In case you forgot, Dragon Phantoms spawn only if the Ender Dragon is not loaded, which means that Ender Dragon either doesn't exist or is in unloaded chunks. So now with the same spawn chances, Ender Jaculi will spawn when the dragon is present and loaded. So there was another under the hood change for the Urk. It'll now use bees instead of vexes for its AI, which improved its locomotion, and the facing behavior is using the carrots. So basically it's kind of like raycasting, although it doesn't work quite perfectly in some specific directions. So there is a team in more mobs that has no collision, and some entities are added to it because of technical reasons, and so Urks and Ashwings have been removed from that tag, so now they will have collision. One of the reasons why Urks would instantly die in water is because they were two entities, with one entity being a passenger of the other, and if the vehicle entity was to die, then the passenger would also be coded to vanish, to make sure that the mobs would spawn properly. And now not every passenger will automatically dismount underwater, so this behavior no longer exists. So Smokeballs are interesting because they've received a bunch of technical changes. So they will detect entities in a 2-block radius from them, and they will hit the entity, so you will receive knockback, and this is using the damage command. And this will also address the damage to the fume. So for example, if the fume shoots a skeleton and hits the skeleton will then aggro on the fume. They will also not persist forever. They will eventually explode if they have not hit a target for a long time, and blocks with collision will usually cause smoke balls to explode on impact as well. So when the explosion itself happens, whether it hits an entity or a block or just times out, that's when the damage is applied in the 2-block radius. So the Flaming Tarantula Hunch is no longer a slime entity, it is now a vex entity, and therefore it'll no longer suffocate in blocks. That's also the reason why it has more health and why its damage detection is more accurate than it was before, and also that is why the hitbox is smaller than it was in the previous version, and that is also why it is now emissive. And with the display name, it's basically the case that in the previous version, the Flaming Tarantula name was also used for the Hunch, but now the Hunch itself has a different display name, and that applies to the translation key, which is the way that more mobs will assign models and textures to mobs. And so as stated in the main video, the drop rate for Flaming Tarantula Hunches is basically the exact same as rabbit feet when it comes to dropping from rabbits. However, in the rabbit loot table, there is no guarantee that the item will drop, but if you actually get lucky enough, the item will drop, but it also has no chance to drop if the entity has not been killed by a player. And now the breaking particle is using the actual Flaming Tarantula Hunch item texture, and the growth particle is using the Nether Wart item texture. So Bane of Arthropods will apply the damage that will be calculated depending on the level of Bane of Arthropods you have. It is hard-coded through each level they can obtain in survival, so level 1 through 5, and you will get 2.5 damage per level. So if you have Bane of Arthropods 1, it'll deal 2.5 damage, and if you have Bane of Arthropods 2, it'll deal 5 times 2.5, sorry, I'm bad at math. And so because the damage has to be applied after you hit the mob, initially it was coded to be instant, but since the entity is being damaged while you hit it with the weapon, it often didn't actually counter in the bonus damage that the enchantment is supposed to do. That's why the enchantment damage is delayed after you actually punch the mob and their hurt time is reset. So in the previous versions, Martyrs used to glide almost all the time when there were no blocks with collision underneath them, but now it has to be 6 blocks with no collision. Also in the previous versions, they were teleporting over lava. Basically, it looked unnatural and they were always wobbling up and down above lava. So in this version, they will not do that. However, as you can see, the mechanic of them jumping really high if they are above lava still works, though it doesn't always trigger. So since in this version, almost all the custom items are poisonous potatoes and a lot of other data packs are doing the same, the scooper functionality has changed so that they will only now accept Flaming Tarantula Chelicerae as items that they can be bred and healed with. Previously, Mormob's custom items would be different vanilla items, and the Chelicerae was one of those items that was always a poisonous potato. So now the game will detect how much health the scooper has, and if it doesn't have full health, feeding it the Chelicerae will no longer make it go into love mode, it'll only heal it 2 hearts. And it'll also display the matching particle. And only when you feed the scooper when it's at full health will it enter love mode. So the hitbox was quote-unquote fixed. Basically what that means is the interaction entity hitbox has been widened. And they will also take less damage from eating beetroots, but the damage will be applied using the damage command. So the chickens that the scoopers can spawn in sometimes with are the same chickens that spawn in with jockeys. So they have an is chicken jockey tag, which basically means that they follow hostile mob despawning rules and they do not lay eggs. And the baby scooper and Affray riding functionality has been possible with the use of the /ride command. Basically every second there is a random chance that a baby scooper will ride an adult if it is in a 2-block radius, and the same random chance enables them to dismount the adults that they are riding, and they will not dismount if the adult is saddled. So there are a lot of passive mobs and animals that can ride the scooper. It's of course an entity tag, and so basically that includes animal mobs and passive mobs that are not too big. For example, cows will be able to ride scoopers and villagers too, but horses or sniffers are not able to. Basically, it's the same mobs that can fit into a boat. And this also works once every second and in a 2-block radius. If there is a saddled adult scooper without a passenger in a 2-block radius, then the passive or animal entity will mount that scooper. And if you take the saddle off the scooper, the entity will dismount. One exception is that adult scoopers will not mount saddled scoopers. The legs clipping in scooper and Ashwing models were just simple fixes. The legs were moved just a slight bit to not cause Z-fighting. However, if you fly far enough away and zoom way in, some clipping will still occur. So scoopers and Ashwing shivering is using the same mechanic that angry Ashwings and Cyclops use, which is the same mechanic that transforming spiders use, and that is freezing ticks. So basically it's the same thing that's used by the powder snow freezing, except they don't actually take damage. And the cold biomes are determined by the built-in biome types that are used for tadpoles and frogs. And this is hard-coded for the nether dimension, so if, for example, there's a cold biome in the nether, none of this will apply. The Ashwing's jittering was occurring because the phantom entity actually had AI, so when it was being teleported to the Vex entity, it would often jitter because it was turning the opposite way. And now the phantom entity does not have AI unless the Ashwing is disturbed. And the Cyclops heads are using the same mechanic that allows player heads to create custom sounds with the no block interaction. So the vanilla built-in dimension and biome tags, for example, is overworld and is nether, have been added to more mobs. So now the more mob spawning system will use the built-in biome tags from Minecraft vanilla itself. Cave detection is separate, however, and it'll include stuff like underground structures and biomes, as well as a specific Y level. So now ancient cities have been added to the list of structures in the in-cave predicate. And while mummies and cyclopes used to spawn at specific Y levels, they will now spawn in inverted cave criteria. So for example, if a pig spawns in an ancient city now, it has no chance to be replaced by Cyclops. The Affray's jump disabling ability was previously using a bugged jump boost effect, which is why sometimes you could jump extremely high into the air instead of your jump being disabled. Now this is controlled using the jump strength attribute, so basically it is setting it to 0. It's applying the attribute modifier to the entity that was attacked by an Affray, and after 5 seconds have passed, the modifier will be removed, and also every second while you have the modifier, you will summon a Miasma particle. And Affrays are also using other attributes now. For example, the size attribute is applied to them now, and they are 83.25% of their original size. Their jump strength is also 0, and adult Affrays have a step height of 1.5. Baby Affrays, however, only have a step height of 1 block, and they work similarly to scoopers in a way that they will mount adults in a 2 block radius. And other attributes have changed for the baby Affray as well, so the 7 health instead of 30 that it used to be, and 2 attack damage instead of 6 that it used to be. However, when the baby grows up, it'll actually gain the proper attributes that adults have. So now onto the particles. They are all technically item display entities, and a lot of things for them are hard-coded for that reason, but they are actual entities, and when Miasma is first summoned, it'll be in its first stage. It'll persist for 1 second before it starts falling down, or if the Affray entity gets away, it'll also start dripping down, and they will start falling, which basically uses teleport commands. Until it meets a solid surface, it'll continue falling, but once it has fallen, it'll change into its third state. After a second of persisting, it'll be killed. So in the overworld, the Miasma will be deleted if it's at y equals -63, but in the nether and it is hard-coded to be higher up. Also, when the Miasma is summoned for an Affray, it'll be teleported to one of 9 set locations around the Affray. Basically, it's like a 3x3 grid, so it's not randomized. And similar to a lot of other things, every second there's a 20% chance that a Miasma will spawn at an Affray entity's location. So Corrupted Hearts and Fiendish Brains no longer have the enchantment glint, which in the old versions was basically just an enchantment ID 100. In newer versions, you can now add an enchantment glint override, which has nothing to do with enchantments themselves. But these items do not have that. They are just animated items, and they are no longer detected when they are loaded from mobs, so they will just drop themselves with no special effects. Baby Hoggus being teleported under adult Hoggus was a bug because the Hoggus uses 2 separate entities. One is actually a Zoglin that will display the model, and the other is a skeleton horse, and that one is actually the entity that has the AI and controls the mob. However, it is invisible, and so in the previous versions, because of the hitbox differences, babies could walk under an adult, and the Zoglin will get teleported to the adult Hoggus skeleton horse. So baby Zoglin entities in a Hoggus will no longer be teleported to any skeleton horse Hoggus entity. They will only be teleported to the baby skeleton horse Hoggus entity. So minor helmets are actually magma cream, and that is because they have an interaction with dynamic lights. So when before the miners would spawn with torches in their hands, which would cause the dynamic lights, the dynamic light will be much dimmer now because the minor helmet is technically magma cream. And in this version, the minor helmet cannot be obtained. It's not a finished feature. However, if you use commands, it is possible to equip yourself with a minor helmet. It doesn't work like a helmet at all. The only function that it provides is dynamic lights. And also it does have the same interaction with you that it does with the miner. So for example, the powder snow extinguishing the candle on the helmet, which turns it into a carrot on a stick or a poisonous potato. I'm not sure which at this point. I might have changed that during development, but either way, that plus the candle lighting back on and changing the helmet back to magma cream also works on players as well as miners. And that should be it for this version. There's a bunch of other things that I could mention, but that's really getting deep in the weeds. If you're interested about the technical side, you should just dig into the files yourself. It'll be very confusing because there are so many files, so many branches, and there are so many moving pieces because the data pack is huge, but you can find your way around it. So that's basically all I have for you on the technical side of the data pack in this version. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to smash subscribe, ring my bell, and as always, stay.